Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. What an exciting day to be here at the Kennedy Space Center. My name is Cheryl Hurst. I'm the Director of Education and External Relations, and it's my great honor to begin this program this morning. We have a wonderful group of panelists that are going to be speaking to you today on this very historic occasion. Monday marks 50 years since we as an agency in the nation launched a man from just a few miles from here into Earth's orbit for the first time. As we celebrate today, we also have in our minds the 6 international astronauts who are living and working on the International Space Station. The first steps, the first flights, and the first milestones of the early 60s set the course of the foundations for the many accomplishments that were to come. Before we begin the program, I have a few very special members of our audience that I'd like to introduce to you. First, Miss Annie Glenn, wife of Senator John Glenn, accompanied by their family and guests. Please welcome them. We also are blessed to have Miss Patricia Carpenter, wife of Mr. Scott Carpenter, and accompanied by their family and friends. Joining us also today is the 7th director of the Kennedy Space Center from 1997 to 2003, Major General Roy D. Bridges. We also want to acknowledge we have 11 spaceflight awareness honorees who have made many accomplishments towards the success of human spaceflight program. Please welcome our honorees. Now to begin our program, we have a video that we're going to kick off, and please enjoy.
In the midst of the Cold War, here the Soviet Union and the United States poised to annihilate each other with nuclear weapons, and it was an extraordinary time.
Of course, we were all given orders, which were supposed to be secret, to come to Washington and to not discuss the reason for those orders with anyone, even our wives.
NASA finally got interested in sending somebody into space. It was such a new thing. It was all very, very secret at that time. We went through a long selection process, and which included physical and psychological and every measurement they knew how to make on the human body, I guess. So when we finally came down on, we were finally selected. We were very happy to be there and felt honored to be among the 7 to be selected.
Well, I realized that I'd been chosen to be part of the first team. That was the end-all, be-all for me.
The original 7 were, of course, figures that were revered. The engineers who were doing the designs, the launch crews who were doing the day in and day out work, and then the crew shimmying into those little tin cans called capsules that were taking us into the heavens.
plan to come back and land on the water. And so we did a lot of water training on it too. So what would happen if you had a leak in the spacecraft after you once hit the water, what the impact would be, if you're underwater, could you get out? And training like that tried to train for every possible contingency.
When I got to fly the shuttle, I knew what to expect. I think when John flew his first flight, he didn't know what to expect. And that's a huge difference. When John first launched, he was on a brand new rocket, never been to orbit before. We didn't know how humans would react in zero-G. We didn't know whether they'd be able to eat. Some people said their eyes wouldn't focus. All kinds of crazy stories that John told me that they told him before he launched to expect. He didn't believe any of those, and most of them were not true, but we just didn't know back then.
The day that I finally went, that was the third time I had actually suited up and been on top, been locked in and ready to go. But when you finally get in the thing and you're ready to go, you're very, very busy. People think you're in there contemplating great thoughts, and I think it's more likely you're in there, as I was, double-checking all the instrumentation and talking to the people on the ground crew to make sure that everything was okay for launch.
That countdown for the launch is something you've done time and time and time again, so it was, in a sense, just another day at the office. But this was real, and it caught everybody's attention.
Godspeed, John Glenn. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Roger, the clock is operating. We're underway. Loud and clear. Roger, we're programming and roll okay.
Godspeed, John Glenn. I was in the blockhouse when he was, and the last to speak to him before liftoff. Gus and Al had both done that, but they weren't riding on this big, big fuel tank that had the ability to give him more speed than what Al and Gus had had. They didn't have enough to coast all the way around the world. They just had enough to go up a little ways and fall back to Earth.
People look at all this fire and smoke on the ground, they think you're under huge stress inside. You're not. The thrust is just barely greater than the weight of the spacecraft, so you lift off very gently. And the more the fuel burns out there, the lighter it becomes, and the thrust is still high. So the farther you go up here on this entry into space, the more G's you feel inside.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine. Capsule is turning around. Oh, that view is tremendous.
Roger, turnaround started.
Roger, capsule turning around, and I could see the booster during turnaround just a couple of 100 yards behind me. It was beautiful.
Roger, 7. You have a go, at least 7 orbits.
Roger, understand go for at least 7 orbits.
Everything worked perfectly, and then there was an indication that John's heat shield was loose, which meant that after the 3rd orbit and on the deorbit that he would burn up if it was.
Well, I certainly wanted to make it a two-way trip and come back, of course.
It's the first thing I actually remember in my whole life is sitting in front of our nice black and white TV on the floor, because I had to get real close because, I was really excited about this, watching the John Glenn flight. And the thing I remember most about it is sitting there worrying about whether or not John Glenn was going to survive when that heat shield was getting a loose one.
During reentry then, instead of jettisoning that retro pack here and getting it off so I had a clean heat shield for reentry, we left that on so that the heat shield would be held in place until the aerodynamic force of reentry would tend to hold the heat shield in place. Now that made for an interesting, well, the re-entry was going to be interesting anyway, but it was even more interesting because as I would glance occasionally out the little window, I could see chunks of that retro pack breaking up and coming back by the window.
My condition is good, but that was a real fireball, boy. I had great chunks of that retro pack breaking off all the way through. Rocking quite a bit. I may still have some of that pack on. I can't damp it either.
And I couldn't be absolutely certain then whether it was the heat shield breaking up or the retro pack. And obviously it was a retro pack or it wouldn't be here today. But anyway, it was that kind of re-entry was the second problem we had in addition to the control system failure.
If you listen to the tapes, it's pretty clear that he knows that there's something going on there, and it's not the normal procedure, because he knew the procedures really well. He knew that retro pack should have been gone.
Coming out of the blackout period and saying, Houston, this is Friendship 7. And of course the nation went nuts. The world went nuts.
Main chute is on green. Chute is out in reef condition at 10,800 feet and beautiful chute. Chute looks good. On O2 emergency, and the chute looks very good.
His odds of not surviving this was about 1 in 6. So it was an extremely high-risk, unknown effort that they were going into, having never done it before.
And it came time for aligning the capsule in the proper attitude for retrofire. There was underthrust of the rockets themselves, and the result of the intermittently failed horizon scanner meant that the rockets were pointed in the wrong direction. Each one of those failures made me fly a little bit too far, and it all added up to 250 miles. Had a lot of people frightened. I was not frightened by that because, contrary to their lack of knowledge about my location, I knew exactly where I was. I was back on the water where I wanted to be.
We did research. We learned the new things first. And those were, and with a little investment and educated citizenry, away we went. With we became a leader in the world in just about a century and a quarter.
It was a total, resounding success. And it was a great, great honor and pleasure to be a part of such a marvelous and successful program.
First, I'd like to please welcome our own Center Director, Bob Cabana. Bob is the 10th Director of the Kennedy Space Center, a veteran of 4 space shuttle missions, and very dear to us. Bob? Next, please welcome NASA Administrator, the Honorable Charles Bolden. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my proud honor to introduce the first American to orbit our Earth. On February 20th, 1962, John Glenn, aboard his space capsule Friendship 7, was launched on an Atlas launch vehicle from this very location. This launch firmly established the U.S. in the great space race of the time and provided a stepping stone towards the many accomplishments to come. Glenn retired from the space program and the Marine Corps in 1964 to enter private business and to pursue his interest in politics. He was elected U.S. Senator in 1974 and served 3 subsequent terms. On October 29, 1998, Senator Glenn returned to space as a payload specialist on a 9-day mission aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery, the only astronaut to fly in both the Mercury and shuttle programs. Glenn, at age 77, participated in experiments that studied similarities between the aging process and the body's response to weightlessness. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Senator John Glenn. Now our second American hero, our final distinguished guest, Scott Carpenter, the second American to achieve Earth orbit. He piloted his Aurora 7 spacecraft through 3 revolutions of the Earth, reaching a maximum altitude of 164 miles in May of 1962. After an absence from NASA, where he conducted undersea research with the Navy, he returned to duties with NASA as an executive assistant to the director of the then Manned Spaceflight Center in Houston, Texas, and was active in the design of the Apollo lunar landing module and in underwater EVA crew training. Carpenter continues to apply his knowledge of aerospace and ocean engineering as a consultant to industry and in the private sector. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Scott Carpenter. Now, Bob, we turn the program to you.
Wow. I can't think of a better way to kick off the festivities for KSC celebrating 50 years as a center, starting back in 1962, than to have these guys here celebrating 50 years of Americans orbiting in space. It's truly an honor to have both of you with us today. All right, so we're just going to have an informal discussion here, and I've got a few questions I want to ask. First off, the Marines have you surrounded, but you're in good hands.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
When the Marines are this close, that's not good.
And Senator, I know you're really proud of being serving the country as a senator, and you're really proud of being an astronaut. But I think most of all, I've had the privilege of knowing you for some time. You're pretty proud about being a Marine fighter pilot.
Yep.
And flying in space at age 77, you've given me hope. I've got a few good years left, and I'm ready.
Thank you, Bob.
All right, we're getting ready to human-rate an Atlas rocket for our commercial crew program here. You flew the first human-rated Atlas rocket. What were you thinking when you climbed aboard that thing back on February 20th, 1962?
We had a lot of thoughts. You had a lot of confidence in what was going to happen. I might add, though, the very first time we ever saw a missile launch down here when they brought the 7 of us down, it wasn't that successful. It was a night launch. And we were on a camera pad, I think a couple, 3,000 feet from the launch site. And it went up and blew at high Q at 27,000 feet over our heads at night. And that wasn't a very good confidence builder for our first trip to the Cape. But then we followed all the things that happened after that very carefully with all the development of the Atlas at that time, and had great confidence, or we wouldn't have been aboard that thing. And I was sorry there was a scrub last night of Atlas V out here, which we were out to look at, and I guess they're going to try again today. But the Atlas has had a long, long history out here, and we had a lot of confidence in it, or we wouldn't have gotten on it.
Scott, you launched in May of '62, and 12 days before your launch, they had a failure of an engine in a test out west. What did you think about climbing onto a rocket that had an engine blow up on it just 2 weeks prior?
I was just glad that the engine that blew wasn't on my machine.
How was your flight? What did you learn from John's flight on your flight? How was it different? What can you say about it?
They were very similar, but I was busy, too busy on my flight. I would have been given liberty to plan a lot of scientific experiments, which was good, but I loaded the flight plan too heavily and was too busy, and I fought to catch up for the entire flight. We learned from John's flight that man could indeed control a machine and operate properly in prolonged zero G, and that allowed me to plan my flight plan, because we knew by then that man could operate intelligently in prolonged zero G.
Bob, if I could add something there. The things we were looking at back on those first flights seem almost so primitive now, they're almost laughable. But the doctors, some of the ophthalmologists were literally concerned at that time that your eyes might change shape and your vision might change enough you couldn't even see the instrument panel enough to make an emergency reentry if you had to. And so they were enough concerned about it. We actually put a little miniaturized eye chart at the top of the instrument panel. That's still in Friendship 7 up in the Smithsonian. If you look in there, it's up on the top of the panel. And they were concerned about with the fluid moving around more randomly in the inner ear, would you get nausea and vertigo so bad you wouldn't be able to function? And could you even swallow? And we look back now and think of how ridiculous that is, but it wasn't ridiculous at the time, and those were the kinds of things that we had to prove before we could go on other designs.
That would tend to make you believe that there were so many ridiculous unknowns that we behaved ridiculously in flight.
That's right.
Charlie, you were in high school probably when John launched. What?
Now you're going to make me feel old.
I wasn't in high school yet, John. What did these guys mean to you?
I can tell you, I'm a person. Most of the folk here have heard me say before. I never dreamed of flying an airplane. Never dreamed of going in space. But watching them really lit up the world for me in terms of probability or possibility of things that we could do. You know, we talk about you say all the time, wanting to inspire youth to get into STEM-related areas. You know, had I not seen what you all did, who knows what I would have done. I probably never would have taken the path that I ended up taking, you know, going to the Naval Academy and then coming in the Marine Corps, which was another thing I never dreamed of doing. You talk about medical things and concerns. We still have those concerns today, and I know you are probably our most articulate proponent of enhanced use of the International Space Station. Yeah. And I know you're going to talk about it, but before you do, we have something very special that we'd like to present if we can. And I think if it's queued up, we got a couple of messages we'd like to deliver to you all. So if you can kind of wheel around or just look.
Hi, I'm Dan Burbank, commander of the International Space Station, along with my crewmate and colleague, Dr. Don Pettit. 50 years ago, at the height of the Cold War, Americans and the entire world received the news they desperately wanted and hoped for. John Glenn was safely in orbit. It was a mission that put America back in the space race. And this was more than a successful orbital spaceflight for the United States. It came at a time when the challenges of technology and science were further complicated by the political pressures that accompanied the dawn of human spaceflight.
This assignment fell on the shoulders of John Glenn, Scott Carpenter, the Mercury astronauts, and the whole Mercury team. In contrast to the Mercury program, today on the International Space Station, we have explorers working from all around the world in cooperation.
So on behalf of the Expedition 30 crew, we'd like to recognize Senator Glenn, Scott Carpenter, and the entire first generation of space explorers for pioneering the new frontier, enabling us to focus on extending human presence further into the solar system and helping to bring nations together in the common pursuit of peaceful exploration of spaceflight.
That's great.
You mentioned, I didn't realize you had had the privilege of doing your own flight plan. Bob and I didn't get to do that, but you mentioned overloading your flight plan with science, and I will tell you one thing. I don't know if you know Don Pettit. Don is known as Mr. Wizard of the Astronaut Office. He is an incredible scientist, and he has grossly overloaded his flight plan for his 6 months in the area of science, but he is doing incredibly well there. So.
Seeing that video, it makes you realize how far we've come in the last 50 years from when you climbed into those Mercury capsules. Your spacecraft have been in museums for quite some time now, and
Bob, okay,
and
don't put time in your.
And Senator, the last spacecraft you flew in that Charlie and I had the privilege of flying on is getting ready to head up to Washington here, April 17th, Discovery. What do you see as the future for human spaceflight? Given where we've come, where are we going? What's your perspective on it? Scott?
Mars.
Okay.
Yes.
I think the future is twofold. I think we'll do more exploration, whether it's asteroid, Mars, or wherever. I think it'll go on beyond Mars sometime, probably not in our lifetime, but sometime. I've always thought, though, that wherever we go, we should maximize the research return that becomes available in that new era. In that new area, we've learned how to travel. And Charlie's heard me say this many, many times. But I think this is where we ran afoul here in some recent years, and all of you are very much aware of most of this anyway. But under a previous administration, a decision was made to go to the moon, set up a base, and go to Mars, but no funding. And the funding was to come from cutting out the shuttle flights, which I have thought was a big mistake, and it left Charlie in an awful position for having to perform his job, because we don't have the way of transferring our own people from Earth to space, and we have to do that with the Russians. And what a big change that is from the days when it was the depths of the Cold War was fueling a lot of the interest in the space program back in those days in the 60s. And so it's a whole different thing. And I think we developed the International Space Station, and that's a little incongruous. We spent $100 billion or so developing that station to do the basic research. And on the last flight I was on shuttle, we had 83 research projects on there, and Columbia, before its demise, had 90 research projects on there. That's what fleshes out the exploration as we go on. I think we should be doing that because that's what's of value to people right here on Earth. I think to go on out in space is exciting, and just to see if we can keep somebody alive far out and back, that's fine. It's exploration. It opens up new paths. Then we should maximize the research return, which we have the capability of doing with the station. And instead of cutting it down as was proposed in that other administration, by 2015, it's now been extended out to 2020, which I think is with the option of going beyond that, I think was actually stated too. So we hopefully have our new way of, one of these days, have our new way of traveling to the station, so we can get on with this basic research, which to me is basic research is macro and micro. Macro is how far you can go and open up new territories. Micro is maximizing that laboratory research return that we have the capability of doing. It makes the program doubly valuable.
So we're getting ready to celebrate 50 years of KSC, and there were some very strong personalities in the space program back at that time. One of them, of course, our first center director, Dr. Debus. What interface did you guys have with Wernher von Braun and Dr. Debus? Any stories you can share with us?
I'd like to mention that Wernher von Braun was the brightest, absolute, fascinating genius that I've ever had occasion to know. In mentioning von Braun, I have to tell you my belief that the lunar flight program was a success because of two crucial, crucially important people. Number one was John F. Kennedy. His charisma and his vision, Camelot and all, galvanized the nation behind the flight to the moon. And Wernher von Braun's blinding genius showed us how to do that.
John?
We were privileged after we were in the program for a while to go to Huntsville a number of times, and we were guests at von Braun's home up on the ridge there several times. And I remember, to back up what Scott was talking about, the depth of knowledge, going in his library, and I fully expected to see nothing but engineering books and rocket and books and things like that. And it was just the opposite. There were very few of those, a few of them, but mainly there were books on philosophy and religion and all sorts of things. And if you wanted to get him fired up, talk something about religion, comparative religions. And he was a real student of this. And so he was a very broad-gauge person, and we enjoyed being with him.
Can I say one thing about that meeting at von Braun's home? He was, even in those early days, he was committed to what he called a space platform. It's what we made the space station out of. And he said, being aware, modestly aware of the importance of the German engineers to both the Soviet program and ours, because the real rocket scientists were all German. He had a comment on that when he said that our eventual flight to the moon would end in a tie. The cosmonaut and the astronaut would land at the same moment on the moon, and they would exit their lunar landers. They would walk over to each other, shake hands, and the conversation would be, "Hello, Wolfgang." Hello. He knew how important the Germans were.
You talk about that time really galvanizing us as a nation, and what we accomplished in those years between Shepard's first flight in '61 to landing on the moon in '69 it's pretty amazing. How do you see, do we have the same how do we capture the American public today like we captured it then? Can we do that? What do we need to do?
Oh, I know it's very difficult. I think in some ways the fact that attention goes down is almost a tribute to our American society, because we're accustomed to so many new things. New automobiles, new airplanes, new communicating, cell phones. And the person in there probably doesn't have a cell phone in their pocket. That has more computing capacity than anything back at the time when we were flying in '62. We're accustomed to the new things and get used to them. It's hard to get excited about something new. I'm sure we establish bases someplace else, or if we make that flight to Mars, that'll re-galvanize people again, I expect. And I think reactivating a lot of the research that we could be doing on the International Space Station once we get our way of traveling back and forth, and Charlie's right in the middle of that one, that will energize a lot of our thinking in this regard too.
Can I ask the two of you something? Because Bob and I were with the Kennedy family earlier today talking about the budget, which is really dull. And that's why it's packed now, and it wasn't when we did it earlier. But this could be a loaded question, and so give me your two perspectives on this family that's trying to facilitate the success of a commercial space industry. The commercial crew is headquartered here at the Kennedy Space Center. It's the first time since your time flying that the headquarters for a human space program has been here at Kennedy. Sometimes, and I'm going to speak for them, I think, sometimes they have doubts about the path on which we're treading. And Bob and I try to tell them how critical it is to set goals and meet those goals. What advice would you give us all as we try to fight through this, gain the confidence of the American people in an American capability to send Americans to space? Absent government control, if you will, because that's what we're trying to do. Good or bad? What would you tell us? Give it up? Press?
Give it up is absolutely unacceptable. But the reason we are not pursuing diligently a course to the moon and eventually Mars is because we haven't figured out yet how to energize the public behind this pursuit. If we knew how to answer that question, we'd be on our way. I don't know how to do it. How do we do it, John?
How do we do it, Charlie?
I think
no, it's a big one. I'm not making light of it, but I think these things depend on people. They depend on you. Nothing's going to happen unless you have people here working to do this, and that's where the people right here in this room play such a key role. And maybe changing from the way of doing things, commercial space so-called or whatever. NASA never had any factories of their own. It's always been commercial space to some degree, but this is a little different emphasis now. I understand that. But that doesn't mean that the individuals are any less important in it. One thing, and this doesn't dodge the question, but it's a little more philosophical, I guess, in the importance of this for the long-term aspects of our nation. And I think that's an important part of this thing. And if you think back in the days of this really gets a little far afield, but bear with me a minute. In the time of the American Revolution, we only had 2 or 3 million people along the East Coast. In about 125 years, up to about 1900, we were looked at as a leader in the world. And how'd that happen? What things happened in that period of time that made that happen? And number one was, in my view, number one was education. That became available for everybody. It wasn't just from the kids from the castle or the rich kids. And so we wound up with the best educated general citizenry, particularly in the area of science, of any nation in the world. And number two, and this is where NASA really fits in, is the area of research. We did more for research, and when we discovered the new things first, and without educated people, wow, away we went. A little bit of investment, we led the world, and other nations copied us in the types of industrialization and everything that were possible because of those two things, because of education and research. Well, this is where NASA leads the role, is in this area of research. And particularly back to the station, my favorite subject on this, but that's where we have a huge advantage right now that I don't want to see us lay down to other nations. We know that China and India in particular have big programs, China in particular. And it's to their credit. I don't say that they shouldn't have that. That's great. But I think that the nation, 50 or 75 years from now, the nation that leads the world in education and research is going to lead the world, period. And I want that to be us. And so that's the importance of what you're doing right here.
Is Frank DeBello here, or Jeannie Becker, or anybody from CASAS? We argue about this a lot and discuss it, and I agree with him. But one of the things that I would tell you is that, we've now stood up CASAS, a non-governmental organization, to try to do the things that Scott did on Aurora 7 to draft out the science flight plan for the International Space Station, to go out and try to recruit private entities, universities, entrepreneurs and others who want to fly their experiments in the microgravity environment of the International Space Station. Because I think, as John says, that is the key to exploration for us. We have got to utilize it to the greatest extent possible, and I think it will be natural that we extend station beyond 2020. I think it's just a beginning, but I do agree with you. We've got to stabilize the International Space Station as this incredible national laboratory if we hope to go beyond low Earth orbit, and that's what's really critical. And it's the message I try to give to everybody here to keep their spirits up. And I tell them all the time, they should go home every single day feeling that they've made life better for people on Earth because of what we do in NASA. It's just an incredible place to be.
So I think, too, low Earth orbit, we haven't done everything we should be doing in low Earth orbit as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know what your views are on going to Mars, but I think your best way to Mars is assembling the vehicle in low Earth orbit and then eventually going out of low Earth orbit from that. Some people say, well, we go to the moon and set up a base on the moon and launch from there to Mars. Wow. You talk about a complicated, expensive way to go about it. Man, that's it. And so I don't think we've even begun to exploit the capabilities we have in low Earth orbit that are going to be necessary to going out in deeper space. And so I think that's key, too.
Well, speaking of that, and talking about the workforce, first off, I want to assure both of you that the team we have here at KSC and at NASA across the board is every bit as dedicated and talented as the group that put you guys in orbit. It is an amazing team, and we are working feverishly to define what that path forward is, what the right path is with our evolvable architecture that will allow us to explore while we enable commercial ops to low Earth orbit. International cooperation has been really important. I mean, our space program has been an arm of our Department of State for some time. During the Cold War, working with the Russians on Apollo-Soyuz, working with the Russians on Shuttle Mir and the International Space Station, with our international partners, Europeans, Japanese, Canadians, they've looked for us to lead. And I think we not only did lead, we continue to lead. What about, China's coming up now in the world of space? What are your thoughts on what's going on there?
I would like to say, in answer to that the competition we had with the Soviet Union in the 60s was the lifeblood of the pursuit in those days. The Soviets were doing very good work, and that inspired us. We did good work that inspired them. We were competitors, but it was constructive work we were doing, and the competition drove us, both teams, to do better, and we are now no longer competing, we're cooperating. I wonder if it isn't likely that in the near future the competition between China and the United States will develop into a cooperation. And that's the way it should be, because flight, in my opinion, to Mars or to the moon or anywhere in our space environment is not the property of Americans or Chinese or Indians or Russians. It's a joint project for humanity, and humanity should do it together. If for no other reason, then it's a very expensive thing to do, and so we should all share the labor but the expense.
We made a good step on the International Space Station. We have 16, including us, we have 16 nations involved in the station now. And that's been the biggest cooperative international effort, I think, ever put together. And it's worked very, very well. And there have been different nations have contributed more than others, namely we've contributed more, but it's been a great cooperative effort. And I would like sometime to see, I'd like to see us join with China in doing some things. I know that's a little more difficult than the people we have cooperating with us now, but I'd like to see us go in that going that direction, perhaps getting more and not setting up another potential for Cold War competition.
Charlie, anything you want to add on the importance of international cooperation and our path forward?
I think if you've heard me say it before, and the President has said it, in the national space policy, enhancement of our international cooperation is a cornerstone. It's a key. President Obama talks about it all the time. I try to talk about it all the time. In the areas of science, technology development, human spaceflight, everything, I agree with Scott. The one thing that brings us together is everybody's desire to make this planet a safer, more self-sustaining place that's good for all humanity. Bob and I were talking this morning. I will be very happy if someone nominates the International Space Station for the Nobel Peace Prize. And some laugh, but I am really serious. And when I travel around the world, I meet with American ambassadors, I've met with presidents of other nations. All of them cite the International Space Station as an incredible, not a technological marvel, but an incredible vehicle that has brought people together of all races, creeds, colors, national origins in a common goal. And I think what, Scott, what you were talking about is human beings are amazing when they establish a goal to which they want to pursue and then come together in pursuit of that. We've proved over and over and over again. It's what in the military we call engagement. You can avoid a lot of conflicts if you have the courage to engage and find common ways to get to the common goals you have.
We had the privilege of working closely with the Russians. I'll never forget my first trip to Star City when I was chief of the astronaut office. It was the middle of the winter, and it was 11 o'clock at night, and I was with a Swedish astronaut cross-country skiing on a secret base going through holes and fences as a colonel in the United States Marine Corps, and never in my wildest dreams did I think something like that would happen.
The more we have contact with people like that, the less likely we are to fight them. It comes down to that simple. Let me give you a very simple one. I was just thinking a second ago of this. When I was getting ready for that first flight back then, I thought, well, what if we had to make an emergency reentry and come down? And there were some places, the Namibian desert in Africa, Namibia in the Kalahari Desert. There was the outback in Australia, and there was this area up across Papua New Guinea. And those three areas still had Aborigines. Well, how do you communicate? What if I had to make an emergency reentry and came down? The people on the ground down there, the abos, the aborigines, boom, boom, there's a sonic boom, and they look up, and here comes a little speck, and a white thing comes out, and it comes down, and you land, and the side blows off, and out steps this thing in a silver suit. Oh, you're going to either be like the God King or dead pretty quick. Not sure what. So I wanted a message for these people, you know, friend, me, buddy, take me to your leader, all this stuff. So we did, and this is very serious. I devised this and had this message translated into some of the more primitive languages of the world by some of the linguists at the Library of Congress, so that if I did have to come down, I might be able to phonetically at least get through to them that I'm not what they might think whatever they might think I was. But the point of it is this, and this is what brought it to mind. In looking at those primitive languages, the word for stranger and the word for enemy was the same word. In other words, if you don't know somebody, if they're a stranger, man, they're an enemy. That's it. And I think we too often get caught up with that in our international relations on a big scale, not just in some of this primitive language stuff.
Scott, can I ask you something? You know, you're among us. I think you're the only one that's explored both spaces, sea and space. What did you get from your time, you know, underwater exploring and scientific exploration that is of value to us going, say, to another planet or deeper into our solar system?
Well, I've always been driven by my curiosity, and that adventure with the Navy underwater living program satisfied a lot of curiosity about our environment. That's a very close at hand environment, and we need to know more about it. We learned a lot about the ocean floor and the ocean itself, and what I thought about was that exploration had the potential for increasing our knowledge of our environment, spatial environment, just like the space program did. And I was just pleased that I had not only come to know a group of the most unsung great heroes that I know, those Navy and civilian divers. And I was glad to be a part of that group, but I was mainly pleased by the opportunity to dispel answers to a lot of questions I've had, because I'm just curious.
There are 5 of the original 7 that are not with us today. What stories, what would you like to share about those guys, that they can't be here, that you think that they'd have to say?
Well, John has been very good today at making everybody laugh. There have been some moments of levity because of his sense of humor. But if Wally Schirra were here, we would have laughed a lot more.
I agree.
That's right. No, that was I was sitting here a minute ago thinking about that we need 5 more chairs here. But that was a group that was as competitive as any group you ever saw. And we were real fierce competitors because everybody wanted to be on every flight. And so we were fierce competitors. Yeah. We were fierce competitors, but when it came time for a mission, Wally once again said that was the tightest brotherhood he'd ever been part of, and it was.
I thought about the same thing, John. It occurred to me that with this intense competition we all felt before somebody got awarded a flight, when he was awarded the flight, we were like the Musketeers, had been one for all and all for one. And we operated with that striking bond very well.
That's
Since I have asked controversial questions, I'll ask one more. And David Weaver's about to pass out over there. And I'll start with you, Scott, since you expressed the strongest pessimism. If you were giving a message to American industry today, since in the days of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, you all worked very closely with the Rockwells and everybody else. You demanded certain things from them about the vehicle, Windows, for example. What advice would you give to the CEO of a commercial company that's pursuing the right to be the provider for commercial crew to orbit, which we're really hoping, if Ed Mango's here, he is really working his little backside off to try to get that capability as quickly as we can. What advice would you give to industry today that comes from your lessons from the earlier programs?
To the CEO, I would say try to inspire patriotism in your crew, because that will give us the resolve we need if we have everybody working not only for their company's bottom line and value, but for the nation. If we can get everybody patriotically supporting the good old USA, that will give us the resolve that we don't have now to do these things we want to do in the world of spaceflight.
That has to be key toward anything, is that they're doing this for the country and that they see the importance of it and are willing to dedicate some of their corporation's efforts to that and pay for it. And that's a key part of the commercialization program. And it's a very dicey period that we're going through right now. But it's so important because the sooner we get some of this new capability to go back into space ourselves, from here, the sooner we'll get the station operating up to the level that we had anticipated. It's doing research now, and Charlie's taken the lead to his everlasting credit in trying to maximize that research return. But when you're putting people up on somebody else's vehicle over there that's very limited in its lift capability, and we don't have a heavy lift or capability up or down until we develop our own vehicles, why we're somewhat limited. And so it's that effort that I would stress the importance of it to getting our program back on track, and I hope they feel that in the way that Scott was describing.
We had a panel discussion the other day with some of the original folks from down here, and we were talking about how things got done. And oftentimes it was around a conference table with shirt sleeves rolled up and a bunch of plans on the table, and you made a decision and you went off and you did it. And today we tend to charter another study or have a panel to go take a look at something, and there's good and bad to that. But if you could give us any advice based on what you've seen, all organizations change over time. What could we at KSC, what could we at NASA do differently today based on what you've seen that would maybe help us?
And while you're thinking about it, the guys doing the production are sweating beads.
I'm watching, I know.
So this will probably be your last answer. Make it good. I see your wife sitting down there looking at her watch.
I had a good answer to that question, and you made me forget it.
I can relate to that.
I know, I remember now. I just want to, out of loyalty to our good friend Wally Schirra, I want to tell a story that I hope would make you laugh, because Wally loved making people laugh. I want you all to understand that I love spaceflight just as much as our friend John Glenn did. But I didn't fly in space a second time. I didn't do that because although I offered to be John's backup again, but I said, and I believe it's true, that NASA probably wouldn't allow me to be backup because I wasn't old enough. Okay. End of story.
John, any closing remarks on anything? No question. What would you like to leave us with?
No, well, just congratulations to all you for continuing your interest in this particular area. And I thought if I wouldn't even be supporting NASA if I didn't think it was so important for the future of this country. And that's what you're implementing. Charlie can lead, Bob can lead, but you guys are the ones that have to make it work. And that and the other centers around the country, each one contributes to their own way. But in I mentioned education and research. Those are two key elements that are spin-offs from what you're doing here that I think are going to determine the future of this country and our position in the world, and I believe that. And that's the reason I think it is so important. So we talk about STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and math education, and the contribution that you're making to those things with all of our young people. And I think those are just extremely important for the future, and so just keep it up, keep going.
Well, on behalf of all of us at KSC at NASA, we want to thank both of you for your service to country and for your leading the way for all of us to follow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We're going to give you all our MC business.